For most of agricultural history, we celebrate the mother goddess, okay? But then, as I mentioned, over time, as society becomes larger and larger, the men start to take control. And so they inverted the mythology of the mother goddess. Now, the sky god, who is Marduk here, kills the mother goddess to create the world. Okay? A process of inversion. So, to understand this process, we will read the most famous epic from Mesopotamia called the Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish means from up high. So it's the Bible, basically. It's like what God told us. And this is a story of the creation of the world. Okay, so what's really important to understand is that all the stories are written down in stone, okay? And again, guys, they didn't have to do this because everyone was able to memorize the story line for line. And that's what we did historically. So why did they write this in stone? For propaganda purposes, right? It's the same as in today's world, you go see a film. When you see a film, you're mesmerized, you're hypnotized by the beauty of it. And you must think that this film must be the gods speaking themselves. Okay, you don't think about, okay, how did they put this together? Your mind doesn't think like that. Your mind's like, oh my God, this is an image before me, therefore it must be true. Okay, and that's why they wrote stuff down for propaganda purposes. Now, what's interesting is that there's different writing systems around the world. So in Mesopotamia, they had these cave tablets, right? But in Egypt, as you may know, they have papyrus. Okay, papyrus are these plants. They take out the plants and then put them together in the sun. Okay, and then they become like these scrolls that you can write on. In China, of course, have the paper. So what's interesting is that when the need arises for writing, we always find creative ways to express ourselves in writing. Okay? Papyrus scrolls don't really last that long. That's why we know less about Egypt than we know about Mesopotamia. All right, so the Enuma Elish was written on cave tablets. So let's go over the story, the Enuma Elish. So in the beginning, there are two major gods, Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu means fresh water. Tiamat means salt water. Okay? Fresh water, of course, is the river. Salt water is the ocean. Okay? When they come together to create all possible life, including their children, the new gods. Tiamat and Apsu create these new gods, but they're children, so they're really loud. And Apsu is like, you know what? These children are really annoying. I want to kill them. Tiamat overhears this, and Tiamat tells her children who rebel and kill Apsu. But then Tiamat's like, you know what? They killed my husband. So now she's pissed, okay? So she decides she's going to go kill her children too. She has a general, and there is this huge army, and they start to attack their children. These children are thrown aback by Tiamat. So they elect a new champion called Marduk, the thunder god, the sky god, to lead them into battle against Tiamat. And in the final battle, Marduk, who's also called BL, he kills Tiamat, okay? Now what happens afterwards is really interesting because after he kills Tiamat, the mother goddess, he takes her body, and then from her body, he builds the entire world. He builds both the sky and the planet Earth, okay? So let's read some lines. BL rested, serving the corpse, in order to divide the lump by a clever scheme. He split her into two like a dried fish, okay? So he literally cut her like a fish. One half of her he set up and stretched out as the heavens. He built the sky from her body. He stretched the skin and appointed a watch with the instruction not to let her waters escape. He crossed over the heavens, surveyed the celestial parts, and adjusted them to match the Apsu, known as abode. So Apsu was the husband who was killed. Biet measured the shape of the Apsu and set up Ezra, a replica of Escala. In Escala, Ezra, which he had built in the heavens, he settled in the shrines Anu, Enlil, and El, okay? So what's important to understand is this. He's doing this to the mother goddess, okay? So not only is Marduk proclaiming a new order, but he's also proclaiming new values of struggle, exploitation, toil, right? Before, The Mother Goddess was a religion of balance and harmony. Don't destroy things. Worship the animals as they're your friends. If you kill them, make sacrifices to them. And now this new religion is, no, destroy the world and make it yours, okay? So this is a civilization that practices irrigation, right? Because irrigation really is about controlling the earth. All right, let's continue. All right, so what happens now is that after Marduk creates the world, he has to establish a bureaucratic order, okay? An order, a hierarchical order. So he says, he fashioned heavenly stations for the great God and set up constellations, the patterns of the stars. He appointed the year, marked off divisions, and set up 3 stars each for the 12 months, okay? So he's basically building a calendar. The idea here is that all these were bureaucratic inventions in Samaria in order to better govern the people, right? What this myth is doing, the Enuma Elish is doing, is proclaiming that the bureaucratic world is divinely ordained, okay? This didn't come from the priests, it came from the gods. The priests are just the messengers. All right, let's continue. All right, so now that Marduk has built this world, he's like, you know what? I'm tired and I want a place to rest. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build a house, which is my temple, and then I'm going to make slaves in order to serve me. And these slaves are called humans, okay? That's why we were invented, to serve the gods. Before we understood that the gods served us, helped us, or loved us. And now we must become slaves to the gods. Beneath the celestial parts, whose floor I made firm, I will build a house to be my luxurious abode. Within I will establish a shrine. I will found my chamber and establish my kingship. Okay? All right, so now he's going to turn humans into slaves. He conceived a desire to accomplish clever things. He opened his mouth, addressing Eel. He counsels that which he had pondered in his heart. I will bring together blood to form bone. I will bring into being Lula, whose name shall be man. Okay? All right. And the gods, by the way, are called the Anunnaki. Okay? That's why there are conspiracy theorists on the internet who say that we were invented by the Anunnaki. All right. So what Marduk does is that he takes his enemy, Tingu, and then he kills him, and then from his blood, he will create mankind. Okay? They bound him, holding him before Ale. They inflicted the penalty on him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood, he created mankind, on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free. Okay? Now, what's really interesting for us to remember is that throughout this poem, Marduk has different names, Bel, Eel, okay? And the reason why is that what happens in these epics is they take different traditions and they combine together into one composite story, okay? All right. After the wise Eel had created mankind and had imposed the service of the gods upon them, that task is beyond comprehension, for Nimrod performed the creation with the skill of Marduk. King Marduk divided the gods, or the Anunnaki, okay, the gods, into upper and lower groups. He assigned 300 in the heavens to guard the decrees of Anu and appointed them as a guard. Okay? So now he's going to create this hierarchy. So yes, all humans are slaves, but there's some humans who are better slaves than other humans, okay? And that's what explains the hierarchy. So as you can see, the Enuma Elish, it was written in order to justify the existing power structure. And honestly, this is a concept that's still true today, right? Why do we have schools? Why do we have media? Why do we have entertainment? It's to justify the existing power structure and social order, okay? All right. Now we get towards the end, and this is to establish that Babylon is the divine city. If it's divine, it means you can't leave it. You all want to be here, even though being in Babylon means you're enslavement, okay? Let us make a shrine of great renown. Your chamber will be our resting place, wherein we may repose. Let us erect a shrine to house a pedestal, where we may repose when we finish the work. When Marduk heard this, he beamed as brightly as the light of day. Build Babylon, the task you have sought. Let bricks for it be molded and raise the shrine. The Anunnaki wield the pick. For 1 year, they made the needed bricks, okay? So Babylon, the capital, is a city made by the gods for the gods. And then humans are there to serve the gods. Okay, so this is the divine order. This is the mandate of heaven. Okay, and as you will see, this is not just true for Mesopotamia, for Babylon, but also true for all major civilizations, including Egypt, okay? So this is a tapestry from Egypt. As you can see, the gods are in control. The gods are the puppet masters. And the kings are just being controlled by the gods, and then humans just do what the gods demand of them, okay? This is just the natural order. This is the mandate of heaven. This is the way that it should be. Okay, now let's talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh. So there are two major literary achievements of Mesopotamia. The first is the Enuma Elish. The second is something called the Epic of Gilgamesh. As you can see, Gilgamesh, he is a giant human. He's a king. He's considered the first king of Uruk, okay? And he's so big that a lion is his pet. Okay? What happens is that Gilgamesh is a king, but he's a tyrant. So he takes the men to war and he sleeps with all the women. So the people cry to the gods for relief from Gilgamesh. So the gods create Enkidu from clay, okay? And this is very similar to the story of Adam in the Bible. And Enkidu is like an animal. But then Gilgamesh sends a prostitute to seduce him and then becomes civilized, okay? And now Enkidu and Gilgamesh fight, and when they fight, they realize that they can't beat each other, so they decide to become best friends. They're best friends now, and they embark on all these adventures together. They go kill these divine beings. They go kill the protector of the forest. They kill a divine bull. The gods are now kind of pissed at them because they're disrupting the natural order, okay? So the gods have a meeting. They decide that one of them must die. So they kill Enkidu. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is heartbroken. And he's scared because he's afraid that he will die as well. So he sets on a quest for immortality, okay? He goes and tries to figure out how to live forever. He ultimately fails, okay? And it ends with Gilgamesh returning home, and he sees happiness in the walled cities, in his people being happy, okay? So the moral of the story is that immortality is not about living forever. Immortality is about doing great things for your people so that you'll be remembered forever, celebrate forever. So the irony is that even though Gilgamesh failed in his quest, he ultimately succeeded in his mission because we have his epic, and so we're able to celebrate him even today. Okay, so it's a story that is being told. The question now is, why is this story being told? And one theory is that this is a concept of kingship. Being a king means not doing whatever you want. Being a king means to serve the people so that people will celebrate you and remember you forever and immortalize you in writing. Okay? That's a theory. All right, but ultimately Gilgamesh is a bureaucratic creation. And I'm going to explain to you how this creation works. Through this creation process, we can understand how human society develops over time. So in the beginning, what happens is that each region has local legends, okay? And these local heroes are celebrated through stories. So stories of demigods like Hercules, right? And the epic heroism. They have these stories because each region has a local king. And this local king says, well, I'm the descendant of Hercules, and therefore I should rule over you, okay? And what will happen is that these stories become a test for the king. If Hercules can fight a lion, then you are his ancestor, descendant, right? You are his descendant, therefore you should go fight a lion, okay? And that's how you justify your kingship, through these acts of heroism that's relayed to you in stories, okay? That's the first step. Second step is what happens is that as these different areas become consolidated into a much larger area, these stories themselves become consolidated. So Gilgamesh was basically different heroes. One king comes to dominate a region. Then what happens afterwards is that as the region becomes larger and larger, you need a bureaucracy. So bureaucratic priests come into power, they add in morality and messaging to control the people and the king. Okay, the major message is the king must serve the people, and then the priests control the king. But what will happen is that these different bureaucratic factions will fight each other, and they will have different versions of the story. Okay, so bureaucratic priests take power, the morality and messaging changes. Okay, as different bureaucratic priests take power. Okay, the king must learn humility. So this is a hard thing to understand, but it's really important for us to understand. Otherwise, you cannot understand the Bible and other literary creations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example to help you better understand this process of storytelling. All right. So let's imagine 3 universities: Ohio State University, Connecticut, and Middlebury. And they all have their own local legends, okay? So in these places, something happened that captured the imagination of all the students. So maybe at Ohio State University, Michael James gets drunk the night before examination, and he still manages to pass it. And the students are like, that's a great story, okay? But what happens over time is that because it's just a great story, as the story is told more and more, it becomes exaggerated. Why? Because it becomes exaggerated, it's much more interesting, it's become much more memorable, okay? And over time, people add color to it to make it even more memorable. If you don't do that, the story becomes forgotten, okay? So the only way to keep a story alive is by constantly exaggerating it and bringing color to it. So let's see what happens. Over time, the story becomes Michael James gets drunk before every examination and he scores 100, okay? That's an exaggeration. And then, over time, naturally, through the oral tradition, the story becomes even more exaggerated. Michael James bet his professor that he could get 100 on the exam while drunk. After James finished the exam, he vomited on the professor. He threw up on the professor. The professor could not do anything because James had got 100 on the exam. Okay? All right? So human beings just do this naturally. If something happens, they think it's interesting, then it becomes a legend, it becomes a story, okay? And this happens everywhere. So Connecticut College, a football player scores a winning touchdown, okay? And then it becomes exaggerated. The guy scores touchdown every game, and then even more exaggerated, the guy hits a home run to help his team win the championship, and then later that day, he scores a touchdown to win another, okay? So it becomes more exaggerated. And then let's look at the last one. At Middlebury College, Pat Jack drives to Canada to take a piss, okay? He just does that for no reason. Becomes more exaggerated. He goes to a new city every day to take a piss, okay? And then it becomes even more exaggerated. And now you add color and detail to it. Pat Jack drove to Canada and accidentally pissed on a sleeping bear, okay? He ran up a tree without his pants and forest rangers had to come rescue him. Okay? All right? So this is what happens naturally. The story becomes funnier, the story becomes more colorful, more detailed, more exaggerated, so that we're able to remember it, okay? And then over time, what happens is that these stories become consolidated, combined together to form a new story, okay? Harvard's most legendary student was Pitbull James. He once wrote an exam that no professor could pass. He once hit a home run with one arm. He once pissed on a sleeping bear just so he could knock down the bear with one punch, okay? So it becomes even more exaggerated, it becomes consolidated. Just as the Epic of Gilgamesh, okay? But then what happens is the bureaucrats take over. Okay, the people in charge take over, and they have to change the story in order to better control people. And there are different versions of this process. So let's look at 3. All right, you add just one line and you change the story, right? In the first version, when he became a billionaire, he gave it all to Harvard, okay? So obviously Harvard wrote this story to say, you know what, we don't care what you do as long as you give us money, okay? That's the first version. Second version is, when he wrote, he found his true love, he settled down in the woods to write full time, okay? So this is signaling the primacy of writers over athletes, okay? The smart over the brave. And the third is the bear ate him, okay? So he punched the bear and the bear decides to eat him, which is like, don't be a stupid athlete. Okay? And so when you add these actually lines, you make the story less interesting, less colorful. But you do so in order to better control how people think. And this is a process that we see